What I really was? Inmate 09699016. Federal prison, Lompoc, California.
Had I been left up to my own to do what I wanted to do in my life, follow the path that I was on, I'd either be dead or in prison for the rest of my life. And quite honestly, it's what I deserved. It's what I earned having spent over 20 years on the street. And I realized that if God didn't have a different plan and a purpose for my life, that I wouldn't be here today. My dad at one time was the underboss of the Colombo family. I'm sure most of you heard of him. He's had quite a high profile out here, especially in Long Island and New York. And as you know, there are 5 families here. Underboss is a very powerful position. In that life, you have a boss, an underboss, a caporegime, or a captain, and a soldier. I grew up hating the police. I hated them. Hated the government, hated law enforcement. And it wasn't because my dad taught me that way. He didn't teach me that way. He was smart. He taught me to respect the law. But it was really because of what I witnessed as a kid growing up. Law enforcement tactics and techniques against organized crime when I grew up were very different than they are today. Today, everything is very covert. Got a lot of high-tech surveillance equipment, a lot of undercover informants. A guy can be under investigation today and not really know about it until it's too late. Back in my day, when they were under investigation, law enforcement wanted them to know about it. My dad, for a period of about 10 years when I was a kid growing up, was under investigation from 7 or 8 different agencies. FBI, IRS, Queens Detective, Nassau County, Suffolk County, you name it, they were on him. And every one of these agencies had a car parked around my house 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I tell you, I love my dad. I didn't care what people said about him. You know, what I read in the newspaper, guys would make remarks about him because he had a lot of publicity. You know, your dad's a mob dad. I'd fight. I love my father. He was a great husband to my mom, great father to us, very, very supportive of me. Originally, he didn't want this life for me. He wanted me to go to school and be a doctor. Son, you got to stay off the street, get an education. That's where it's at. He got in some real trouble in the 60s, indicted several times, a couple of times in the state for some very serious crimes. He was indicted for homicide and so on and so forth. He went to trial, beat all those cases. But then in 1966, he was indicted in federal court for masterminding a nationwide string of bank robberies. After a lengthy trial, he was convicted and in 1967 sentenced to 50 years in prison. In 1970, after he lost all his appeals, he was shipped off to Leavenworth Penitentiary in Kansas to do his time. I was a pre-med student at Hofstra University when Dad went in. I was devastated, so my whole family was. He was 50 when he went in. Figure he had 50 on top of that, he'd never come out of prison alive. And I started to lose interest in school. You know, Joe Colombo was the boss of our family back then. He kind of took me under his wing. We were close with the family. I started meeting a lot of my dad's friends. Mike, what are you doing going to school? If you don't get on the street and help your father out, he's going to die in prison. I was very affected by that. I went to see Dad in Leavenworth. We sat in the visiting room. I said, Dad, I'm not going to school anymore. If I don't help you out, you're going to die in here. Because people, I want to tell you this. My dad did a lot of bad things in his life, no doubt. So did I. No doubt about it. I went to jail for a crime that I was guilty of. I pled guilty and went to jail. So we're talking in the visiting room, and he knew my mind was made up. Because I was pretty headstrong as a kid, and he said to me, okay, son, but if you're going to be on the street, I want you on the street the right way. In his mind, the right way was to become a member of his life. He said, go home, somebody's going to be in touch with you, do what you're told. That was it. My dad didn't give me any instruction. He didn't tell me this is what's going to be required of you, nothing. He just said, go home and do what you're told. He figured I had it in me. He knew me well. Go home and do what you're told. You know, one of the policies in that life is you're not supposed to talk about the life to anybody outside of the life. And my dad, if he was anything, he was a good soldier. He wouldn't violate that, even with me, his own son. He just said, go home and do what you're told. And a captain in the family picked me up that took me to see the boss. Joe Colombo had been shot and seriously wounded, eventually died from the wounds. A new boss took over. His name was Tom DeBella. I sat with Tom. He said, Mike, I got a message from your father. He said, you want to become a member of our life. Is that true? I said, yes. He said, well, here's the deal. From now on, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're on call to serve this family. That means if your mother is sick and she's dying and we call you to service and you're at her bedside, you leave your mother, you come and serve us. From now on, we're number one in your life before anything and everything. When and if we feel you deserve the privilege, the honor to become a member, we'll let you know. I was 21, 22 years old. I left there that day. I was in kind of pledge period. I had to do anything and everything I was told to do to prove myself worthy. Could have been something very menial. A lot of discipline in that life, a lot of authority, a lot of alleged respect. And after about a year and a half, I proved myself worthy. Halloween night, 1975, I was called into a room again with 5 other guys. And that night, we all took an oath and became sworn made members of the Colombo crime family. I took that oath very seriously back then, people. I take it seriously today, even though I don't consider myself a member of the life anymore. They say when you leave that life, you either leave in a coffin or you join the government and enter a witness protection program. Obviously, I've done neither at this point in time. Walked down the aisle, stood in front of the boss, held out my hand. He took a knife, cut my finger, some blood dropped on the floor. This is a blood oath. I was motivated to do two things. I wanted to get my dad out of prison, and I wanted to make money. I was very motivated. My dad said in this life, money is power. Do whatever you got to do, make money. And I was very motivated. I was very aggressive on the street. I was fortunate. I knew how to use that life to benefit me, and business went on to make a lot of money. It's not necessary. No need to go into any of that. 1980, boss of my family, Carmine Persico. He made me acting captain for my father. Eventually, I became a captain. And from 1980 until about early 90s, when I left the life, I was in that capacity. 1984, I'm a captain in a family. Honestly, my dad was grooming me to be the boss, but I'm doing pretty good. I became a major target of law enforcement. I got indicted 5 times. I went to trial 5 times. I beat every case. I beat Rudy Giuliani in 1984 on a big racketeering case. I was the first major mob guy he indicted under the RICO statute. I was the lead defendant. I had 15 co-defendants. And I'll never forget, Rudy told me in a courtroom, he said, if I convict you on this, Franzese, you're going to get double what your father got. I'm going to give you 100 years. He told me that the day of my arraignment. I remember standing toe-to-toe with him. I said, hey, Rudy, bring it on. Beat you guys 4 times already. Let's go for round 5. And let me tell you, that's a dumb thing to do. You don't ever antagonize them. They don't need any more incentive to come after you. But, I was young and arrogant, didn't like the police back then. But I was very fortunate. After a 7-month trial, I was acquitted. Honestly, you probably know I was in the gasoline business. Our main office is right out here in Suffolk County. I was doing pretty good. We were bringing in $8, $9, $10 million a week into our operation. I have my own jet plane, my own helicopter, house in Florida, house in Marina Del Rey, California, house in New York. I had hundreds of crazy guys under me. I had organized the Russians in the gas business from Brighton Beach, and we were doing pretty good. Age of 34 years old, top of the world, Ma. Got all of this money, beat all of these cases, maybe going to run the family at some point. Top of the world, right? Had it going on. Now, did I believe in God back then? Sure I did. Why? Because it makes sense to believe in God. When I look around this world, I don't believe in any Big Bang Theory. I don't believe I got anything in common with a snail or a crocodile or a flower, other than that we were made by the same creator. Intelligent design makes sense to me. And let me ask you this. If I evolved from an ape, why are apes still here? What, did some of them decide to be apes and some of them said, no, I'd rather be a human? God makes sense. But did I have a relationship with him? No. He was doing his thing, I was doing mine. And then something happened. Among many things I was doing back then, I was making movies. I had a production company out in L.A., and I was making movies. And Smokey Robinson was a friend back then. He and a guy by the name of Leon Isaac Kennedy, they were friends, and they came to me with a script for a breakdance movie. A lot of music. It was hot back then. A lot of music, a lot of dance, a lot of rap music. But that's when you can listen to rap music on the radio. Not like today. Forget about this stuff today. But back then it was cool. We had the Sugar Hill Gang, Run DMC, the Fat Boys, Curtis Blow. I liked those guys. They were all in the movie. I said, hey, I'll make the movie if we can film it in Florida. I got a house down there. I like the warm weather. Let's do that. So we're going to film this in Florida. And I bring in cast and crew from L.A. to work in the film, and I bring in 50 professional dancers to dance in the film. And I got everybody staying in a hotel in South Florida, the Marina Bay Club in Fort Lauderdale. And we were in pre-production. We were getting ready to film. And I'll never forget one day, we were kind of relaxing, getting ready to film, and we were all sitting by the pool. Beautiful day in Florida, sunshine and gorgeous there. And I'm sitting there minding my own business. I got a drink in my hand, talking to a couple of guys. And guys, you'll appreciate this. All of a sudden, out of the water comes this gorgeous 20-year-old girl. I see her. Everything went in slow motion. It was like a Pepsi commercial for me, right? Beautiful. So I see her, and I said, man, who is this girl? She looked like a dancer. She had a dancer's body to me. The choreographer was sitting next to me. His name was Jeff. I said, hey, Jeff, is that one of your girls? He said, yeah. I said, bring her over. I want to meet her. Figuring, big shot producer, she'll want to meet me. Why not? So she comes over. Her name is Camille. I introduce myself to her. I said, Camille, my name is Michael. I'm your producer. I want to get to know you better. Let me take you to lunch. She says, okay. Very sweet, polite, gorgeous, right? So we set a time and a place, and I got this restaurant set up on one of the top of one of the hotels. I figured, no problem. She'll come in. I'll sweep her off her feet. She's mine, right? I'm up there 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a half an hour, 45 minutes later, I waited. She stood me up. She never showed up. Stood up a mob guy. Imagine that? But she didn't know who I was. So I see the next day on a set. I said, hey, what happened? You didn't show up. You know what got me? She never made an excuse. She just kind of looked at me and smiled. She didn't say anything. So, I got to make myself feel better. I said, well, were you dancing? You rehearsing? Say something. She said, yeah, I was rehearsing. I said, okay, let's try it again. We set up another time and a place. I go. She stood me up again. Now, she did this to me 5 times. She would always say yes, never show up. If she was sitting here, she'd roll her eyes and say, stop exaggerating. It wasn't 5 times. Believe me, I was the offended party. I wasn't used to rejection. Guys, we know when we're rejected. It was 5 times. I want this girl. She don't want to have anything to do with me. One night, we're having a cast meeting. It's 9:30 at night, and she's coming out of the meeting, and I see her. She's with some of her friends. She's upset. Something's wrong. I said, oh, this is it. Tailor-made for me. Whatever I got to do to solve the problem. I got to fire somebody, get rid of somebody. I'm in, right? So I see her. I said, what's the matter? She finally starts to talk to me a little bit. She tells me she's from Anaheim, California, Disneyland. She used to dance in Disney and Knott's Berry Farm. She had no clue what she was getting involved with me. And she says, I really need to go home. She said, my mom and dad, I have never been away from home this long. They want me home. It's 3,000 miles away. She said, there's some crazy things happening on this movie set I don't really agree with. Those sets can get kind of wild, music, dance, young kids, a lot of stuff going on. But I'm saying to myself, well, you're a dancer. What's a big deal? But then I start to think, we used to go to a lot of these after-hour places in Lauderdale, Miami. She would never show up. 1 or 2 friends, dance, back to the room, that was it. So I asked her, well, what's the problem, And she brings it out. She says, I forget how she put it. She said, well, I'm a believer, a person of faith, something like that. I said, well, I'm a Catholic. We got something in common. Let's talk, right? Anything to get to know her better. I got to cut to the chase, make a long story short. I fell very much in love with this young woman, and she's now my wife of 28 years. And there's no doubt that she was the catalyst that God used to lead me to the Lord. And the reason I say that, people, somebody can lead you to the Lord, but nobody can make you accept him. That's very personal. That's between you and God. And, so I'm really interested in this girl. We start to hang out a little bit on the set. I start to get to know her well. And when we break, she says, you got to come home and meet my mother. You got to meet my mother. I say, hey, no problem. I'm good with moms. Let's go, right? We get on a plane. We go to California. Her mom, Irma, was the most godly woman I ever met in my life. You meet Irma for 2 minutes, your name goes into her prayer book. She had a prayer book like a telephone book. I'm not kidding. And the entries in the book, the guy I saw on the corner with one shoe, the delivery boy that came to the house, she didn't need to know your name. She thought you needed prayer. You're in the book, and she was praying for you. A prayer warrior. Believes so strongly in the power of prayer. And I will tell you this, I believe that woman prayed me to where I am today. I'm starting to fall in love with this girl. Now, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't buying into the Christianity. She was a Christian. I respected her beliefs, but I'm a Catholic. I'm not going to change. Why? I don't know. Not that I was a practicing Catholic. It's just we don't change, right? But I'm looking at her, and I'm looking at her mother, and I'm saying, you know what? Jesus really means something to these women. Her mother used to talk to me like Jesus was standing next to me. It was like it was spooky at times. I was saying, hey, maybe I don't belong in this place. I wasn't buying into the whole Christian deal, but I respected their beliefs. Now, here's what's happening. Here's how God works. The reason I told you where I was when I met her. When I met this girl, it was never on my radar screen ever to walk away from that life. I'm at the top of my game. You don't even think about it. It wasn't a thought. I wouldn't disrespect the life, wouldn't disrespect my father. It wasn't even a thought in my mind. But all of a sudden, I meet this young girl. My love for her is becoming more powerful than this lifelong bond I had with my dad. More powerful than this blood oath that I took to La Cosa Nostra. Now, how do you explain this? I'll be honest with you. She wasn't the first beautiful woman I ever met in my life. But there was something about her. And I know now, after 28 years, and the way my life has turned, that something was God. So I'm starting to realize if I want this girl in my life is a direct contradiction to everything that they believe. It's never going to work. They can't accept what I'm about. They didn't force me into anything. My wife didn't even understand what my life was about. My wife is out in Anaheim, California. There's no mob out there. And as for me, I'll tell you how far out of left field our lives were. My wife is Mexican. Now, if you know, back in New York 30 years ago, we didn't have any Mexicans. I never even ate a burrito before I met my wife. I don't know anything about Mexican. And my wife knew nothing about the mob or anything. She saw The Godfather once. That was it. But there was something about her, and I realized that I had to make a change. So I had a plan. Always had a plan, right? I said, here's the thing. They're going to indict me again, Eastern District. You know, another big racketeering case. Every year you become a target when you get on their radar. So I had a plan. I beat the government so many times, they'll want to get some time on me. I'll take a plea on this case. I'll give them some money. Back then we were under the old law. You know, you still had parole. I'll take a plea. I'll give them some money. I'll do a couple of years in prison. I'll marry Camille, move out to the West Coast. When I get out of jail, I'll have parole and probation. The guys know I can't be in contact with them. Maybe after 10 or 12 years, that would be my excuse. I'll live out on the West Coast, marry this girl, live happily ever after. They'll forget about me here in New York. That was my plan. It had nothing to do with God. Nothing whatsoever. That was my plan. So, I'm going to marry this girl. I do take a plea, 10-year prison sentence, $15 million restitution, $5 million in forfeitures. I figured I'd do 4 or 5 years. I say to my wife at that point in time, can you handle me doing a couple of years in prison? You know what she said to me? Amazing. She said, I'd rather have you alive in prison without your struggles than with all those struggles on the street. She said, God will be in the foundation of our marriage. We'll make it through. Everything was God with her. Everything. So, we get married in July of 1985. I take my plea in December, go off to prison. While I'm in prison, I got to tell you this, people, I'm really not the story here. I brought so much baggage into my marriage, okay, and I caused it all. It was all my responsibility. I did everything. This girl didn't even realize what she was getting involved in. She's really the story, what she had to go through because of my former lifestyle, what we went through. She will tell you, I love my husband, but if God wasn't in the foundation of our marriage, I wouldn't have made it through. Too tough. We went through a lot of struggles. 5 years in prison. I get out on parole 13 months, the worst time of my life. Horrible parole time. I violate my parole like an idiot, go back into prison for another 3 years. I thought I was going to lose her at that point. Contracts on my life. My father disowning me. Everybody upset with me. The feds all over me. What this girl had to go through, it was amazing. And I love God for that. I love this girl. I'm glad he kept her in my life very much. But so we get married in July. I go off to prison in December. While I'm in there, I'll cut to the chase. Long story short, okay, I'm faced with a situation where I had to reject my life or not. I did renounce my life, never thinking it would become so public. It shoots back to New York like a rocket. Life magazine writes this whole story on me. I don't know how we got off on a tangent. If you read that story, you thought I was going to be testifying against everybody in the world. It was horrible, okay? The feds get word. They come in to see me in prison. They said, Franzese, words all over the street. Quote, you're a dead man anyway. Cooperate with us. We'll put you in a witness protection program. We'll preserve your life and that of your family. I wasn't interested in that. I didn't want to hurt anybody. I just wanted out of the life. And I'm going to be honest with you. I did a real dance trying to walk a fine line between the feds and the street and trying to do whatever I had to do, not to hurt anybody, yet to try to get out of that life and maintain some kind of a life for me and my wife. It was difficult, and that's another 4-hour story just to get into it. Okay? I get out of prison after 5 years. I'm on parole. Big shot mob guy, made all this money on the street. I was like a fish out of water in L.A. I couldn't put a house in my name, no utilities. We were dodging bullets back and forth. A lot of stuff going on at that time. The feds were putting a lot of pressure on me. Every time I walked out the door, my wife thought we didn't have cell phones back then. She would beat me. I had to run to a payphone. Honey, I'm okay. It was tough. After 13 months, I tell her one morning, honey, I'm going to the bank. When I come back, I'll take you to lunch. I go to the bank 5 minutes from my house. I walk out the door, 15 agents. They slapped the cuffs on me, throw me into the paddy wagon, took the keys to my car, took my car away, went to my house with a search warrant, cleaned us out, went into my wife's purse, took out every penny, said, this is racketeering money where you're indicting your husband on another big case. You don't work. This is all his money. She couldn't even buy milk for the kids. Cleaned her out. Drove me down, and they told her, your husband will never see the street again. He's done. As they're driving me down, they said, Franzese, we don't want anything from you anymore. We're putting you back in prison. We got new witnesses, another racketeering case. We violated your parole. Told me the same thing. You'll never see the street again. I go into, they put me in that 6x8 cell in MDC, LA, ready to transport me back to Brooklyn in the morning. And here's my situation. I said, I'm done. It's over. I said, they took all my money? Another racketeering case? People, you don't beat these cases with money. Without money, forget it. You're not doing it with a public defender. They're tough. I said, this girl, she waited for me 5 years. Okay, 13 horrible months on the street. We got 2 kids now. How's she going to wait for me now? She can't even buy milk for the kids. The girl I did all of this for, I'm going to lose her. Why is she going to wait for me? She's 26, 27 years old. I'm done. I said, I got nothing but enemies. Everybody's looking to hurt me. They're never going to put me in the yard. I'm going to have to spend the rest of my life in this 6x8 cell. I said, it's over. At the age of 37, I'm done. I want to tell you this. I have felt every emotion you can feel in life, from ecstasy right down to grief and everything in between. But I've learned that the worst emotion, the most horrible emotion you could ever experience in your life is hopelessness. When you feel everything that's dear to you is gone, when you've lost everything, when you're in this deep, dark hole and there's nothing you can do to get yourself out, especially a guy like me who was a control guy my whole life. I said, it was the most horrible feeling in the world. I'm going to be honest with you. You can call me a coward, call me weak, whatever. My heart hurt so much that night, it was like a physical pain. I couldn't endure it. My head was pounding. It was bad. And I want to tell you this. I was angry with God. I was angry with him. Why? Because I had accepted Christ. Why not? My mother-in-law, my wife, accept Christ. He'll forgive your sins. Oh, really? I want some of that. What do I have to do? Get on my knees, say a prayer? Really try to mean it? Did I really mean it? I don't know. I don't know. Because I tell you this. I tell you why I don't think. Yeah, I wanted to be forgiven, but I wasn't willing to do the other part. I remember my mother-in-law telling me, you have to surrender to Jesus. Surrender to Jesus? What do you mean? I'm a mob guy. God helps those who help themselves. I'll surrender to the court to get a better sentence, but I couldn't process that surrender part. But I will tell you this, I think your acceptance of Christ is made whole in your surrender to him, because that's when he can work through you. And if you don't give it up to him, well then you don't just get forgiven without letting God work through your life. Because then it doesn't take effect. At least that's happened with me, and I'm not trying to change anything biblically. That's how it happened to me. You got to give it up. You got to have this relationship. But I couldn't accept that. And I'm laying at that cot, I'm angry with God, and I'll be honest with you. I just wanted to close my eyes and never wake up. And I'll tell you this, I'm ashamed of this. But I used to belittle people that were suicidal. Suicide, that's weak. How could you be so weak as to take your own life? I don't do that anymore. Because I'll tell you what, I wasn't suicidal that night, but if I could have closed my eyes and not wake up, that's what I want. It was too painful to think. That's how bad it was. And I'm lying in that cot, and a prison guard walked by my cell. And he said, Franzese, you okay? He looked in, he said, you don't look good. I said, get away from me. I chased him. I said, leave me alone tonight. I don't want to see any of you guys. He left. And he came back about a minute later. And I'm in a hole, so he pushes this book through the slot in the door. It falls on the floor. I hear a thump, right? And I'm kind of groggy. I looked down. I saw it was a Bible. I got mad. I said, I don't want a Bible. I don't want to read. I want a bottle of Prozac or something. I want to forget what I'm going through, right? And I'm looking down at that Bible, people. I'm not exaggerating. I'm looking down at the Bible, and I'm feeling sorry for myself. I'm getting so angry with God that he put me in this situation that I jump off that cot, pick up the Bible, and I threw it against that cinder block wall as hard as I could. It's like everything came out of me. It was the first time I got really, really emotional. And I'm there. It took me about 30 seconds. I said, you know what? I got nothing but enemies. I got everybody in the world mad at me. I don't need another enemy. It's only me and God in this cell. I believed in God. And I picked up the book. And, you know, I just looked up at the ceiling and I said, God, if you're really up there, you need to do something to help me tonight. Give me something to make me feel better. And I want to tell you this. I opened the book. And another one of God's coincidences, I opened it up to the book of Proverbs. Now, I'll be honest with you, I never read the Bible before. When you're in Catholic school, you read the catechism, and the priest reads the Bible from the pulpit on Sunday. You don't really study the Bible. And I opened it up to the book of Proverbs, and that was no coincidence. Because I told you, I'm an analytical guy. You got to prove things to me. And I start reading Proverbs, and I'm blown away. I'm saying, wow, this guy was really brilliant. Solomon was brilliant. You know, it really caught my attention. I'll tell you, when God said to Solomon in the book of Kings, nobody before you will be as wise and nobody after you will be as wise, as a reward for something he didn't ask for, with the exception of Jesus, who had a little advantage, he was God, nobody was as wise as Solomon. And I'm starting to read, and the book is really catching my attention, and all of a sudden I come to a verse that just stopped me cold. And people, I want to tell you this. I have never seen God in a dream. I've never heard him speak to me audibly. Now, some people might have that gift. I don't have that gift. But God does speak to me through this book because I have a relationship with him now. And I came to this verse, and for some reason it just stopped me. Just stopped me. Proverbs 16:7 says, when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, even his enemies are at peace with him. Now, I'll tell you how I interpreted that verse that night. It was like, when a man's ways are pleasing to the Lord, it was like God was saying, Mike, you're mad at me. You married this girl. But who did you marry her for? Did you marry her for me or did you marry her for you? I didn't marry her for God. I married her for me. It was selfish. I wanted the girl in my life. Oh, you left that life. You did such a noble thing, Franzese. Well, who did you do that for? Did you do it for me or did you do it for you? I didn't do it for God. I did it for me. It's what I wanted at the time. That's how I interpreted that at that moment. And it was almost as if God said, well, if you'd have done that for me, I'd have taken care of all your enemies. You know, you'll realize when you start to get close to this book and you read it, how many times have you said, I've heard people say this to me, and I know you've experienced it. You'll read a verse in the Bible and it'll say something different to you each time you read it. Why? Because it speaks to you according to your needs at that moment. When you have that relationship with God, that's how He communicates with you through this book. It's one way. And that's how I interpreted that verse that night. But it caused me to read on at one point and say, wow, it's really affected me. And I started to read on, and I came to a verse that's become the verse of my life, people. And it should be the verse of every one of your lives. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways, everything that you do, acknowledge Him. And He will, not He can or not He might, He will make your path straight. That's the night. That hit me, that verse. And I looked up and I said, no, God, if you're really God, you need to show me. That's the verse that caused me to challenge God. And I want to tell you what happened. I spent the next 35 months and 13 days in prison. 29 months and 7 days in that hole. Me and God, 24/7. The racketeering case fell apart. They never were able to indict me, but I did get that parole violation. And that's the time I spent in there. And during that time, I did my work. If you see my prison Bible, there's more of my notes in there than there is scripture. I read over 400 books that my wife sent me, and I read about every faith. I want to know the good and bad. I'm the kind of guy, tell me the bad first. So I wanted to compare. I read about Islam and Judaism and all the different faiths and Buddha and Mormonism and everything else. And I read so many Christian books. And I had a Sony Walkman. And I listened to some of these wonderful, wonderful evangelists that have such a gift in interpreting Scripture. And I was convinced during my time in there that the Bible is God's Word and that Jesus is really our risen Savior.